So, let's say tomorrow some bombshell evidence comes out, and it says there was a conspiracy. Which conspiracy would you theory would you be least surprised by, or in another way, which one do you find most plausible? I've heard you say, and I really respect this in interviews, that you're not saying 100% sure there was no conspiracy. You're just saying all the evidence points to there not being a conspiracy, that it was Oswald alone. But of course, you're not going to ignore the possibility of it. Which one do you think you'd be least surprised by?
Well, the more massive the conspiracy, the more surprised I would be. Um, First of all, a conspiracy involving Oswald, I'd say, is pretty much necessary. A conspiracy involving Oswald as a witting participant rather than a patsy would be the most plausible. If he were pacified, he'd have every incentive to tell people, uh, I was told to meet Mr. E. Howard Hunt on the second floor lunchroom.
Mm-hmm.
But if he was conspiring with someone uh, whose agenda he knew and agreed with, that would make sense. To give you an example, one good theory about his motivation, and it's only a theory, but it's a good one, comes from Gene Davison, who points out that Oswald may well have known about Kennedy assassination plots against Castro's life. If he did not know about the assassination plots, which he could have because Castro, in an interview with the Associated Press, clearly alluded to the fact that the U.S. was trying to assassinate him. And that interview was printed in the New Orleans papers while Oswald was there. No one can prove whether Oswald saw it or not. But he would have certainly known that the Kennedy administration was hostile to Castro. That was in the Militant. That was in the Worker. Those were two communist papers he was reading. So a conspiracy involving Oswald and another leftist, or two or three leftists, again, the fewer the better,
Right.
for our theory, conspiring to kill Kennedy would be would be, let's say, not implausible. Gene Davison's theory is that Oswald was the self-appointed protector of the Cuban Revolution, that he killed Kennedy as the self-appointed protector of the Castro Revolution, which he was very enamored of. Well, if that makes sense for one person, Oswald, it would make sense for two or three very like-minded people. But for that to make sense, it makes the most sense that Oswald was the shooter. He was well positioned to be the shooter, but maybe somebody put him up to it. Or maybe somebody was supposed to help him escape and that fell through, So, those are conspiracy theories that are, shall we say, not wildly implausible.
Yeah, that's actually what I kind of think too. I think if there was one, again, you'd have to go as small as or smaller the better, just because it lessens the chance of anyone. I mean, the fact that no one has been able to come up with any conclusive evidence showing that he was, you'd have to kind of go small. It's the only way you can keep a secret this big, that quiet. And I think, yeah, I agree. I think it would be kind of in favor of the whole Cuban revolution in Castro, just because of different circumstantial evidence or different things that were going on. He was real active in New Orleans, obviously, with the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. The one testimony I find interesting, maybe I can ask your opinion on it, was Carlos Bruinger. So Carlos reported he was a Cuban refugee, anti-Castro, living in New Orleans, and he testified that he had received information that some pro-Castro agent, because I guess one got caught, a pro-Castro agent was going to be coming to try to infiltrate his group. Was it the DRE?
Yeah, DRE.
Yeah, to infiltrate his group in within the next 3 days. And then sure enough, Oswald walked into his store, and that was within a 3-day period. I can't remember the exact time. I think it was 2 days later or something like that. So I could find, maybe, and then not only that, but one of the incidences that fascinates me the most in terms of a conspiracy is the Sylvia Odio incident. That one really fascinates me for several reasons because the timing just matches up nearly perfectly. So she doesn't know the exact date, but she said it was the end of September because she was packing up and getting ready to move out of her apartment. She had to be out by October 1st. And she claimed 3 people came to the door. One of them was Oswald. 2 other ones were either Cuban or Mexican. And they were trying to pretend like they were part of, and she was suspicious of them. But they were coming asking for money for their cause against Castro. Again, she had suspicions. And the timing just almost matches up perfectly because there's a few-day gap where we don't know exactly where Oswald was in between New Orleans and when he went to Mexico City. And it almost matches up perfectly there. What do you make of the Sylvia Odio incident?
Okay, let's about the infiltration thing. Oswald wrote something called a revolutionary resume to give to the Cuban embassy in Mexico City, where he outlined his credentials as a bona fide important left-winger. One thing he mentioned there was he said he had infiltrated the anti-Castro forces in New Orleans and used the information he gained against them. So his interpretation of the visit to the Casa Roca run by Carlos Benguer was, yes, he was infiltrating the gusanos, he called them the worms. As for the Odio thing, it's important to remember that there certainly was an Anglo type visiting with a few Cubans, and a guy named Leopoldo called Odio, I think it was the day after, and said, this Anglo is loco. I think he said he's a Marine and a good shot, if memory serves. And then he said, we should have killed Kennedy after the Bay of Pigs fiasco. Odio, in her own testimony, says when she heard Kennedy was shot, she thought, Leon did it. Leon did it. She remembered the name of the Anglo visitor as Leon Oswald. She thought, Leon did it. Leon did it. And then she blacked out and was taken to the hospital. And then in the evening, I think it was at 7 or 8 o'clock, she woke up in the hospital and saw a picture of Oswald on TV and said, yes, that's Leon. Leon did it. Now, it's important to remember there's a very, very large element of suggestion there. Believing that the Anglo visitor had shot Kennedy before she saw a picture of him. And then she sees a picture of Oswald and she thinks, yes, that's him. That's a very large element of suggestibility. It's also the case that a lot of pretty good evidence puts Oswald in Houston on the evening of the 25th. That would be the evening it would have to be. Mm-hmm. By the way, Odio thought it was Thursday or Friday. The 25th is Wednesday. But, you can posit she was mistaken about that.
Right. Obviously. If you move it to like Tuesday or something, because Oswald's wife left on the 23rd, right? And then we don't know exactly where he was. He said he was going to stay one more day to pick up unemployment check, but we don't know.
He did that. We know he did that.
He did do that. Okay.
He did do that, although you could posit that on the evening before, if somebody gave him a ride, he could have, it would have been from New Orleans all the way to Dallas at that point, gave him all the way a ride all the way to the Odios and all the way back. That would work. On the evening of the 25th, there's good evidence tying him to a phone call to a woman named Estelle Twyford. The evidence is written evidence. First, she had a note that said Lee Harvey Oswald. I think it had a phone number and then Fair Play for Cuba Committee, which she produced. But then she had an envelope sent to the Socialist Labor Party. That was another lefty faction, not as far to the left as the communist or the Trotskyist. The Socialist Labor Party asking for literature that had been forwarded to her husband, who was the Texas chair of the Socialist Labor Party in Texas. And she actually had, or Horace Twyford, her husband, who arrived back the next day, he had been at sea. He was a merchant seaman. Actually had that envelope, and further, the Twyford's phone number was in Lee Harvey Oswald's address book. I think you pretty much put a trip to Dallas the night before, where you're right, Marina, but someone had to take him to Dallas and bring him back on that evening, probably not to contradict the Twyford evidence, which is handwritten evidence and is pretty solid.
I never heard of that one. Estelle Twyford?
Estelle Twyford, Twiford.
Interesting. That's another thing I'm going to be reading into tonight. I had not heard of that one. But I just from what I understood, it was the 23rd that she left. He might have picked up the welfare check the next day. For me, it kind of matched up maybe, and again, like I said, I don't necessarily believe there's a conspiracy, but if there was one, I thought this was a really good point, just because maybe he left on the 24th instead, left New Orleans, went back to Dallas. He could have been around with different people, and then went to Houston to go to Mexico City from there.
Yeah.
But you're saying there is other evidence that
it's pretty clear he picked up the unemployment check on the morning of the 25th, because the FBI actually talked to the U.S. Post Office people and followed the check by truck. I think it was from Dallas to Houston, where it was on a train. There wasn't Amtrak then. What would it do? I forget. Would it have been Santa Fe or something? Mm-hmm. And the train made it to New Orleans. They figured out when the train made it to New Orleans and what's the earliest the check could have gotten to the Lafayette Street Post Office in New Orleans. And it was, I think, 5:30 a.m. on the morning of the 25th. So they actually followed that check. They actually asked, was mail ever airlifted? And postal people said, no. I assume they meant not unless they paid for air mail. There used to be something called air mail, but even then, I doubt they air mailed it from Houston, from Dallas to New Orleans. So it would have been the morning of the 25th when it would have had to have been picked up.